Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The latest Florida recount, this generation's Florida recount, is continuing across that state tonight. The president is alleging fraud in Florida. He's calling for the recount to end. Meanwhile, a storm of lawsuits from both sides is gumming up the court. And just breaking a moment ago, a Florida judge has now ordered that Palm Beach County be given a 5-day extension to complete its recount. Democrats Bill Nelson and Andrew Gillum were down by a lot a week ago tonight. Now, a week later, they say they are being robbed.
Sadly, it's become clear that my opponent isn't interested in making sure that every lawful vote is counted.
We all ought to wonder when people don't want legitimate votes to be counted. We all have to wonder what's going on.
Well, there's a lot to wonder about in Florida tonight. For example, Broward County's suspiciously incompetent election overseer, Brenda Snipes, is complaining about character assassination.
I think the lawsuits as they are written certainly cast aspersions on my character. I've worked here for about 15 years, and I have to say this is the first time that this office or I have been under such attacks.
Because it's about me, not the job I'm doing. Former DNC chair and South Florida member of Congress, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, says that Snipes is, of course, the victim. Everything is just fine with Mrs. Snipes, she says.
She's followed the process as Florida law proscribes, and there's been absolutely nothing amiss that has been found by Rick Scott's own Department of State election monitors. The process is simply working.
It's working. Debbie Wasserman Schultz really likes Brenda Snipes, but then that shouldn't be surprising because just 2 years ago, Snipes gave Wasserman Schultz a boost by destroying ballots. When it helps establishment Democrats, misconduct is no big deal, but complaining about misconduct, well, as Kirsten Gillibrand of New York explained today, complaining is a form of voter suppression.
We're seeing what's happening in Georgia, what's happening in Florida, what's happening across this country where our right to vote is being fundamentally undermined.
Is there anyone less believable than her? Craig Patrick is political editor and chief investigator at WTVT, Fox in Tampa Bay, and he joins us for the second night in a row. We're grateful to have him. What is going on in Florida tonight?
Well, first you had election managers having trouble keeping track of all the ballots flying in, and now they may have trouble keeping track of all the lawsuits flying in. Because when you look at Nelson, you look at Scott, you look at League of Women Voters, we're now up to, by our count, 9 different lawsuits, and we're just in the first phase of this recount, possibly with much more to come. There are signs of things bogging down, though I wouldn't take too much stock in the state court giving Palm Beach County a 5-day extension to complete the machine recount. That's ultimately something that may be weighed and worked out in federal court. It is a federal race. But to that point, Bill Nelson is also calling for the lifting of all deadlines or extending them for all 67 counties, something also for courts to work out. And then, as you noted, there is Broward County, and there are more wrinkles. Broward County happens to be particularly late to starting its recount. It's just getting started because it seems election workers in that county had been bogged down and tied up in just separating pieces of paper so that they would have the right pieces of paper to run through the machines just to get the recount started. And with that, yes, Snipes continues to be the focus of this national debate. And the question up for debate seems to be whether she is corrupt or inept. That's not a place you want to be. And you have former Governor Jeb Bush, who appointed her 15 years ago, now saying she has to go. And Tucker, here's where it gets interesting, because today she responded by saying, OK, she's going to put in her notice. She put in her 2 years notice. She just said she's not going to run for re-election in 2 years. So she's effectively saying, just let me get through this mess after all the other messes. Then let me manage the 2020 presidential election in Broward County. And then let me manage the race to find a successor for me. And then I'm out of here. But of course, the current or the incoming governor would have the power to hasten her retirement with the Senate and remove her from office. That's where we stand in Broward County. And then you have a big day in court coming up for both Scott and Nelson tomorrow, because Senator Bill Nelson is asking the state to accept a good number of ballots that had been previously rejected, either because they may have been mailed before the election but arrived in the election offices late. He says by no fault of the voters. He wants to change the process process, loosen the rules in which some ballots are determined for voter intent if they mess up the ballot, whether or not you count it. And he also wants to count ballots that had been rejected for signature mismatches on grounds that some people just don't sign their name the same way from time to time.
Of course,
that's where we stand. That's something that courts will hear tomorrow, and then we'll get a much better idea then of where the story is going. But I'll tell you that his chances do not look good, still separated by 12,500 votes at this point. Senator Schumer, Senator Nelson said they still have a chance at this thing, and that may be true, but at this point, I would say his chances may be only slightly better, Tucker, than if he had never been born.
Craig, thank you. The outstanding question, of course, is Florida prepared for self-government? We'll take that up at some length tomorrow. Meanwhile, Eric Eggers conducted a lot of research with the Government Accountability Institute. He's the author of the new book, Fraud, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election. Now, that book was written just before this last election and actually contains a section on Brenda Snipes. The very prescient Eric Eggers joins us tonight. Eric, thanks a lot for coming on. So Brenda Snipes is a name that most of us were not familiar with until very, very recently. Her position is that she's being unfairly attacked as a person. MSNBC's position is she's being attacked because of her skin color. Why do you think she's being attacked?
Well, I think she's not very good at her job, Tucker. And I heard the quote earlier that this is the first time she's been under attack. That would seem to be another thing that Ms. Snipes is not very good at counting, because unfortunately her track record is littered with missteps and violations of the law. I mean, in 2018, this election, we know that illegal ballots will count in the governor's race and in the Senate race because they were incapable of cleanly separating illegal ballots from legal ballots once they've been opened from their envelopes. So we know that's going to happen. But this is not the first time. She's admitted under oath that she's allowed illegal immigrants and felons to cast ballots in Broward County in violation of numerous laws. You mentioned the time she destroyed the ballots that seemed to have given a boost to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Her office has been found guilty of illegally opening ballots inappropriately, right, and without a proper oversight. And so, unfortunately, and actually it's a fun fact, when she was challenged on that topic, why is your office opening ballots outside the presence of the official canvassing board, her argument in court was, well, I guess I didn't understand the meaning of the word canvassing. So, unfortunately, her history is consistent with what we're seeing in the present, and it augurs not very good things for Florida.
So why wouldn't this be a concern of the Justice Department? I mean, this is a federal election. We have a Voting Rights Act. If she's breaking the law in admitting it, why wouldn't the feds swoop in?
Well, you know, that's a great question. It's a question a lot of people have asked, and all the attention that, that Broward County is receiving right now is, how in the world is this woman still in office? Now, there's a difference between not being very good at your job and then violating criminal statutes. And I'm not an attorney, but what I can tell you is that people, I think, have historically been afraid to challenge Ms. Snipes or Dr. Snipes, quite honestly, because of what you mentioned. They're afraid of being challenged as and called a racist. When Brenda Snipes' county office attorney pushed forward, and she was being criticized because she donated to political campaigns, and actually one of the county commissioners who was on the opposing end of one of the campaigns the Broward County attorney donated to, the elections county attorney played the race card and tried to rally support by generating a bunch of African-American attorneys to show up in solidarity. 8 of the 9 members of the county commission when this issue came up were Democrats. And quite honestly, you don't do very well as a political official in Broward County if you attack African-American Democrats. Even though Rick Scott's a Republican, he obviously had statewide aspirations. How well do you think you do statewide in Florida if you're perceived as a racist?
I mean, this is how democracy dies, isn't it? When you have an openly corrupt person in charge of counting the votes, admitting in public that she's breaking the law, and no one can do anything about it? I mean, why is that not an actual threat to democracy?
Yeah, and I think the larger threat, Tucker, to be honest, is she's demonstrated that she's not very good at counting votes. How good do you think she's been at preventing illegal votes from actually being cast? I mean, we know that there's an effort to manipulate this election through illegal voting. There were 108 attempts through double votes in Miami-Dade in this election, which means people tried to cast the second ballot in the same election. The attorneys for Bill Nelson and Andrew Gillum have been criticized because they objected to the removal or exclusion of known non-citizen votes in Palm Beach County. So, my concern, whatever you want to say about these 83,000 ballots that showed up after election night, What confidence level do we have about the ballots that have already been cast?
Well, that's
and were they
exactly
cast by legal voters?
That's exactly right. If you care about democracy, and everyone claims to, these are real questions. Eric, thank you very much for that.
My pleasure, Tucker.
For your book. Well, your report suggests the Mueller investigation could soon be indicting more people. Who will those targets be, and will it make your life better? We've got an investigation into that just ahead. Well, much more, by the way, in the Florida recount. Hillary Clinton has inserted herself into it. In fact, she's on stage at this very hour in Austin, Texas. We're monitoring what she's saying so you don't have to. We'll be right back.
To control the minds and the behaviors of the people in their countries. And there is fear. There's not hope. There's fear of the other all the time. I will feel very...
CBS News is reporting that the special counsel, Robert Mueller, may soon issue new indictments. It's not clear who will be charged, but there are indications of it. And some suggest that political consultant Roger Stone may be on the list. Another possible target is a man called Jerome Corsi, a 72-year-old author, and by the way, Harvard-trained political scientist. He's an associate of Stone's. Corsi has said he expects charges soon. What for? Well, apparently perjury. Corsi says he was manipulated into making false statements to Mueller's lawyers. And if that's true, obviously it's not good. But let's put this into some perspective. False statements are everywhere in Washington. That's what the city specializes in, and not just false statements about small things. Barack Obama told you your premiums would go down and you could keep your doctor. Jim Clapper told Congress that the NSA was not spying on you. Clapper said that under oath. It was an outright lie. He was never charged. So the obvious lesson is, as long as you're powerful and your lie is big enough, you are never, ever charged in Washington. No one is. You can wreck an entire healthcare system. You can take an entire country to war under false pretenses. You can kill American citizens with drone strikes. And you can lie about all of it. And nobody will ever think for a moment about prosecuting you. But give the finger to the establishment, mock the people in power, that is dangerous, and they'll get you for that. Jerome Corsi is learning that lesson the hard way, just as Mike Flynn learned it, just as George Papadopoulos learned it. All three and others have been bankrupted and destroyed by Robert Mueller for doing something that virtually everyone in Washington does every day with impunity, lying. So what was the point of all of this? Why are we destroying all these people? What's the justification for it? Well, it was supposed to be Russia, remember? There were foreign spies afoot. There were dark forces sent by Vladimir Putin to destroy our democracy here in America. That's what they told us again and again on cable news. And that's how we were sold on the Mueller investigation in the first place. Well, 2 years later, we learn all fake. No evidence that any of that was real. No plot has ever been uncovered. All we've really learned is that an independent counsel is a handy way to settle political scores, and that a lot of people on the left don't really believe in the tenets of Western justice. Watch as one of them, just today, one of the resident geniuses on MSNBC, explains the new legal standard for guilt in this country.
When Mueller indicted those Russian military intelligence officers, there was a very big hint in that indictment that there was an American deeply involved. It talked about an American playing a role in that Russian interference scheme.
I remember the keystroke intelligence. I remember thinking, anyone emailing with Russians, you're going to be in trouble.
Emailing with Russians, that's all it takes now to destroy a life. It's been enough to destroy Carter Page's life. Remember Carter Page? He graduated at the top of his class at the Naval Academy. He served this country for 5 years as an intelligence officer. And then he made a fateful mistake. He backed the wrong presidential campaign. Page soon found himself accused of being a Russian spy. There was never any evidence that he actually was a Russian spy. Page was never charged with spying. He was never charged with anything. Didn't matter. The ghouls on cable news kept up the drumbeat. Carter Page, Russia! Carter Page, Russia! Before long, Carter Page's life was over. His reputation was gone. Who would hire him now? Nobody, ever. But the ghouls don't care. They're on to the next victim. And so is Robert Mueller. Maybe it'll be Jerome Corsi this time, facing a criminal perjury count. Maybe someday it will be you. They'll make up some official-sounding charge, but don't fool yourself. What they're really punishing is disobedience. Jonathan Turley is a professor at George Washington University Law School, and he joins us tonight. I am confused by the focus on Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi and Carter Page and people who, whatever you think of them, approve or disapprove, are clearly not central players in a Russian espionage plot.
Well, that's the striking thing, is that most of the counts brought against non-Russians are for false statements or collateral crimes. And if the culmination of this investigation will be someone like Stone or Corsi, it looks like you're running around shooting the wounded. I mean, there still isn't a clear there in terms of a central figure doing some substantive criminal act. And this is going to be a defining moment for Mueller in that sense. You know, he's supposedly working on his report. He's closing in on a new group of indictments. And what a lot of us are wondering is if these indictments are going to bring some powerful narrative end to this.
Right.
You know, because this sort of feels like an Agatha Christie where no one's telling you a thing till the last scene. Because right now, it doesn't look like he has really found central culprits, people who are actually colluding with Russia.
Because if you applied the standards that he applied to General Flynn, whom I'm not defending, I'm agnostic on General Flynn, but just being honest, having lived here all your life, if you applied those standards to any public figure in Washington, who couldn't you indict for criminal perjury?
Well, false statements is the darling of prosecutors in Washington. It is very easy to trip someone up, to go under what 18 USC 1001. And any statement you make of that is false on any subject, a federal investigator can be charged. And they certainly did that here. If you take a look at some of these statements, Flynn's case is really quite weak if you look just at that false statement. I mean, originally, the FBI agents were not viewing that as a criminal matter. Every indication we have is that when Mueller came in, they converted it into something they wanted to indict for. There's no indication that when they saw that statement as being false or misleading, they viewed it as a criminal act. And so the real question for Mueller is whether at the end of this investigation, I do think we can see it from here, are we going to have a figure step forward where you go, okay, I get it. You know, you were on this guy's path.
If there's a Russia plot, tell me what it is. I want to arrest the perpetrators.
Right, but someone like Stone himself says he's a performer. And to indict him is like shooting a mime in Central Park. He's an annoying character, perhaps, but you're still wondering, why did you wait all this time to indict Roger Stone? And, all the earlier filings said that they have no evidence that anyone knowingly engaged the Russians, and that would have included Stone. So we'd have to see a very new shift in the narrative from the past filings.
I think it's disgusting. Professor, thank you very much. Molly, I guess I'm really struck by the individual. I think we should all care most about the individual. What happens to the American citizen, the actual person? And I'm seeing a trail of people who really have been destroyed. And I'm seeing people on cable television laughing about this, the moron we just played a second ago, this is great. But these are actual people who are being destroyed, and I'm wondering what the rest of us are gaining from this.
Well, and it isn't just about the individual. I think also rule of law in general. There's broad leeway in how you prosecute something. The Department of Justice chose differently when it was investigating Hillary Clinton. They had a lot of people, up to and including Hillary Clinton, on false statement charges. If you read the Inspector General report that looked at that investigation, they knew they had Hillary Clinton on making false statements. She was never charged with a crime, even though she could have been. And this isn't even mentioning that she could have been charged with all sorts of crimes with how she handled her classified information. So you want to not just have fairness in how you handle an individual investigation, but across different investigations. When you see that one group of people gets away with anything, no matter what it is, and another group of people gets brought up on process charges when we were promised, quite dramatically, treasonous collusion with Russia to steal the 2016 election. And that's not a good situation.
One of the costs here is the cynicism this engenders in all of us. I mean, we don't believe in the system anymore.
Well, I mean, there's a reason. We've talked about how in other countries they find the man and then they find the crime. They decide someone's guilty and then they figure out how it's done. That's not how we're supposed to do it in this country. We're supposed to start with a crime and then work back from there.
Yes.
And that is not, I mean, in this case, we can see they're going after people who supported Trump. It doesn't even matter in the end how much they charge them with, because the real problem is that they've had to spend all this money defending themselves. They've made it so that it's hard for people to stand up and align
I know a lot
Trump
of them personally, and I know that they've been destroyed by it, and no one seems to care. I care. Thank you very much. Well, the Central American migrant caravan is a myth. You've heard that many times. One reporter went to find out for himself. He investigated it, and we'll show you what he uncovered after the break. Also, more on the Florida recount and the associates that Hillary Clinton sent down to influence it. Hillary Clinton is back. We've got details. Well, the migrant caravan is fake. You've been watching CNN, so you know that. Look at this graphic. Quote, invasion. Well, there's a huge debate right now over the question of nationalism. Some people say the word itself ought to be banned, struck from our vocabulary, but why? What is nationalism? And why is it bad to put America first if you're leading America? We'll take that question up after the break.
It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
Not too long ago, it wouldn't have seemed strange for an American president to call himself a nationalist. Lincoln was a nationalist, so was Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, all very successful presidents. But this president's critics say it's not just wrong to call yourself a nationalist, it's immoral. And the French president agrees, Emmanuel Macron, who, by the way, has copied the style and, to some extent, the substance of Charles de Gaulle, a nationalist French president. But whatever, he attacked Trump by bashing nationalism. Why has this become a theme? Putting your own country first is not allowed. We'd like to get to the bottom of it. Jim Kessler is Senior Vice President for Policy at Third Way, and he joins us tonight. Jim, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.
So, sincere question. So, nationalism, there have been people who've claimed the title of nationalist who've had all kinds of creepy agendas that normal people, including me, would disavow, of course.
Absolutely.
But strictly speaking, the definition seems a common sense one. A leader of a nation state puts the interests of that state above the interests of other states. Why is that
Of course.
bad?
I mean, of course, a leader is going to put the interests of their own country ahead of others. That's not nationalism. Nationalism is a loaded term. I mean, the definition of patriotism is I love my country, and nationalism is I hate your country. That's what it certainly has become.
Really? When did it become that? I'm like, who came up with the idea that that's the definition? I missed that.
Well, the definition of nationalism, especially when you're in the European context where President Trump made that statement, is the nationalism that engulfed Europe in the 1920s and 1930s. The Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party, that's the N for Nazi, is there.
Okay.
And that's loaded, and he knows that.
Hold on. Okay. Hold on. Gandhi was a nationalist, okay? So the leaders of almost every nation state in history up until about 20 minutes ago would describe themselves, and did, as nationalists. So I get what you're saying, but it seems a little too glib and pretty unfair. Let's address the substance of it. So we have all kinds of multilateral agreements with other countries. A nationalist would look at those agreements and say, I want to make sure that my country doesn't get hurt in this agreement.
Absolutely.
The Kyoto Accord, for example.
Yes.
But that's not the way that our leaders who benefit from a borderless world, the finance community, for example, which has gotten so rich, doesn't benefit from that. And so they attack the idea of the nation state. Why would it be wrong to push back and say, no, the United States shouldn't get shafted?
Oh, of course. Look.
If
the definition of nationalism was Gandhi's nationalism, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
It was American nationalism, Roosevelt's nationalism.
Ronald Reagan never used the term nationalist. He used the term patriotism. And especially Donald Trump is using this as a weapon. He's using this as separating this
separating
nation.
Who? I don't know. From other nations? Why would that be bad?
So, certainly in the European context, everyone knows that nationalism is what led to the rise of Nazi Germany. And when he says that the French are nationalists,
you're throwing the Nazi thing out again. But hold on,
well, that's where he did it.
No, he did it also in this country, and I'm doing it here because I think it's important to have an adult conversation.
Sure.
Not one where you win by innuendo. Oh, the end in Nazi is national. Okay, fine. But sincerely, I don't understand why the average person living in any nation state wouldn't want his leaders to put his interests above those of other countries. And we don't. Consistently, we don't. Well, and I can give you 10 examples, and you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And look, of course you want your leaders to put the interests of your nation ahead of others. That's what nationalism is not that. Nationalism is basically saying our country is always right. There are other countries, they are always wrong, and it is to separate us from other countries, and he is using that term as a weapon. His strategy is always to divide and conquer, and that's what he's trying to do with nationalism.
Okay, but I guess that you're coming at this believing that all countries must be united somehow.
No, their countries, of course, are going to have conflict.
But what unites Americans? So if not a shared loyalty to the country they live in.
Melting pot, national identity.
Right.
Those are important things.
Well, but what would be more important than that? Like, so what does hold this country that doesn't have a common race or religion or history? And that's all fine as far as I'm concerned. But what does hold us together, if not nationalism?
A common set of ideals and belief in democracy, and a belief in pluralism, and a belief in the American dream and being inclusive. And I think those are the American values, and those are not nationalist values.
Well,
nationalist values are basically separating into sort of the in-group in this country and the out-group in this country.
But maybe you're misunderstanding the term. So nationalism, by definition, includes everyone within the nation. It does not exclude fellow American citizens. It unites them. And at a time when the left is hell-bent, as you know, on dividing us by race, which is the basis of...
I disagree with that.
Well, no, but identity politics is... The whole concept is we owe our first allegiance to our tribe.
So
and that's obviously
I am a melting pot.
And amen. I knew you were. Good for you. And we agree on that, certainly. But at a time when we are divided by tribe, why wouldn't nationalism be the answer to that? We're all in it because we're Americans.
So here's my question then. Ronald Reagan wouldn't say it. George H.W. Bush wouldn't say it. Bill Clinton wouldn't say it. George W. Bush wouldn't say it. And Barack Obama wouldn't say it. But President Trump said that, and he said it in a European context.
That's the argument? That Bill Clinton and George W. Bush wouldn't say it?
And Ronald Reagan wouldn't say it?
You're not winning me over.
Well,
that's not an argument.
Because you
it's
don't
an
want.
Observation.
Okay, it's an observation. Because that word is now a loaded term based on what happened in the 1920s and 30s, and you know it. Nationalism is not the benign, Teddy Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln nationalism.
Let's reclaim that word, because it's been 80 years, and we defeated the Nazis. Americans died to defeat them.
Yes,
Thank God.
We defeated Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis.
We defeated the Nazis, and that has nothing to do with what we're trying to do now, which is
So do you think when Donald Trump was talking about nationalism in France and to Macron, he didn't know what he was doing and referring to the nationalist uprising in 20s and 30s?
Himself a nationalist, whatever. We're out of time. I hope you will come back, because I think it's an interesting
I would love to.
Conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just when you thought the Florida situation couldn't get any weirder, a former presidential candidate from last time around got involved. What is her plan? We'll tell you after the break. Down in Florida tonight has been sordid enough, but now Hillary Clinton has gotten involved. And if you don't like it, you're a sexist. Clinton is deploying organizers and lawyers to Florida. It could be setting up a third presidential run for her. More evidence that God may be punishing America. Independent Women's Voice senior fellow Lisa Booth joins us tonight to decode these latest events. What is she doing down there? What does it mean?
Well, so she sent out a fundraising pitch on behalf of the DSCC as well as Bill Nelson, and specifically for attorneys and organizers to get down there and fight for this election. And I found it interesting for two reasons. One, obviously this comes on the heel of the Wall Street Journal column written by Mark Penn, and I think it was Andrew Stein as well, basically saying that Hillary Clinton is going to run again in 2020. Yeah. And then the second reason I found it was interesting is she took a swipe at Rick Scott and President Trump. And right now the narrative from the left is that they're trying to undermine the Florida election. What do you think Hillary Clinton has been doing since 2016? She has explicitly blamed Russia for her election loss, saying that it wasn't Trump that got elected, it was at the hands of Vladimir Putin. And also John Podesta, who was her campaign chairman, he was encouraging this effort for faithless electors that was organized by Nancy Pelosi's daughter. So what do you think those two things do to undermine Americans' faith in the system?
It doesn't count, though, because that's Democratic office holders. I mean, come on, Lisa, you know the rules.
I know. I should know better by this point, right?
Should.
Yeah. The rules only apply to Republicans, it seems.
Noticed.
Yeah.
Lisa Booth, thank you for that.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, news from the tech front tonight. Amazon has announced, after months of hype, that it's building 2 new headquarter facilities, one outside New York City and the other outside Washington in Arlington, Virginia. In return for bestowing his grace on America's 2 richest cities, Jeff Bezos, who is the world's richest man, will receive more than $2 billion in subsidies from you, the taxpayer. Well, new Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had this to say today, quote, Amazon is a billion-dollar company. The idea that it will receive hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks at a time when our subway is crumbling and our communities need more investment, not less, is extremely concerning to residents here. Hate to admit it, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has a very good point. Brian Brenberg is Associate Professor of Business and Economics at the King's College, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thank you very much for coming on. That's the only time I've ever agreed with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but it's hard to argue with the internal logic of her point. The richest man in the world just got $2 billion in taxpayer subsidies. Well, how does that work?
And he's been shopping around the country for 14 months, going to cities to see who will give him the best deal. And he's shaken down New York City for about $1.5 billion, and he's done something similar down in Northern Virginia. And again, the whole point is he's trying to cozy up the politicians so that they will give him and his company, a $200 billion company, the biggest tax breaks around and put them in a position where they can fend off competitors for years to come because they're cozy with the rule makers.
Wait, so you're saying that they're paying him to lobby them, and then you see Adam Schiff, the incoming chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, saying he's going to investigate the president for daring to criticize Jeff Bezos?
Oh, yeah,
no.
no.
It's making my head spin.
Jeff Bezos is moving into town because he wants to control these narratives. He wants to control what's happening in the halls of power. He's already hired $13 million worth of lobbying and 100 lobbyists to deal with this. Now he's going to put 20,000 more people right next to D.C. and Northern Virginia to make sure every time there's an issue that affects Amazon, he has boots on the ground in the halls of Congress, in the offices of politicians, to get his preferences passed, even if it means consumers and other small businesses lose out. This is all about getting his hands on the levers of power.
Can I ask you a question as an American? I should just say I'm a property owner in the District of Columbia. This makes my property values go up. I guess it's good for me. But having lived here for a long time, I can tell you the last thing we need is more money in Washington. It's rich enough. Why wouldn't Amazon, subsidized by taxpayers, spread the wealth maybe to Detroit or Cleveland or Toledo or someplace that actually needs it? I don't understand.
Because, Tucker, Detroit isn't anywhere near Congress. Austin, Texas isn't anywhere near Congress. Dallas, whatever the city. This is purely a play for Amazon to buy political influence. They look around the world and they see potential competitors. They like being on top and they want to keep it that way. And the way to do that is to write the rules, to write the regulation. They are buying prime real estate where all of those rules are written. Amazon has gone from a company that disrupts industries to a company that stays on top by buying political influence.
That's exactly right. And it's got a whole political party protecting it. It's
in its
unbelievable.
pocket.
It's the
And even
Democratic
more
Party,
so.
the party of big business. Professor, thank you very much for that analysis. I
You bet.
appreciate it. Well, something pretty remarkable and very strange just happened in the skies over Europe. Authorities are looking for an explanation tonight. We don't know what it is, but we have some facts about what happened. The truth could be out there. We'll bring those to you when we come back. Skies over Ireland. 2 different commercial airline pilots reported seeing unknown objects moving very quickly, remarkably quickly through the sky. Irish aviation authorities have launched an investigation into it because we are interested in what is true. We asked Brett Larson of Fox News Headlines 24/7 to dig into this a little bit, and he joins us tonight.
I just flew in, Tucker. It is another one from the X-Files. Several airline pilots flying across the Atlantic saw something out there, a bright light in the sky, moving at what the pilot thought was at least Mach 2, or 2 times the speed of sound. Concerned for what it was, both pilots on a British Airways flight from Montreal to London Heathrow contacted air traffic control first to inquire if there was a military exercise, and then told air traffic control
appeared to be multiple objects following the same sort of trajectory, very bright from where we were.
To come up on our left-hand side and then rapidly veer to the north. We saw bright light and then it just disappeared at a very high speed. We were just wondering. We didn't think it was a likely collision course. We were just wondering what that could have been.
So multiple pilots reported these lights, but as an astronomer chimed in on the sighting, it suggests it could likely be a piece of dust entering the Earth's atmosphere at a very high speed. November, busy time for shooting stars. Pilots, including our men and women in the military, have reported similar sightings in the past, though never dismissed as simple space dust.
What's so striking about this, Brett, is that it's not ordinary people drinking beer and fishing who saw this.
And staring off into the sky. Yeah,
exactly right. These are commercial airline pilots who, by definition, are experts at identifying other aircraft and lights at night, behavior in the skies. And so you have to sort of take their perceptions a little more seriously than you would, say, mine.
Right. And you recall earlier, or actually late last year, there was the situation with some Air Force pilots who saw and filmed the video of this device sort of flying through the air, and they gave a very similar sounding description of it being very unusual.
So very quickly, we're almost out of time, but I'm always struck in these stories that nobody seems all that interested in following up. Do you think that, well, why is that, do you think?
I've never understood this. I think it's because if you follow it up, you're considered crazy because you're chasing after these unidentified flying objects, when really we should be investigating this stuff to see what really is out there.
Yeah, I have no idea what it is.
Not just space dust.
But it might be nice to know. And of course,
it would be nice to know.
We don't care what people say. Obviously. Brett Larson, it's great to see you tonight. Thank
Tucker,
you
good to see you
for
too.
looking into that for us. I know it won't be the last time. Well, unfortunately, our hour is done. What a great time that was. We will be back tomorrow night, though, 8 p.m. This is a show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Hopefully a cheerful enemy. We'll be back tomorrow. Good night from Washington. Sean Hannity, live now from New York City.
All right, Tucker, Area 51, Roswell, New Mexico. Check it out.
That's right.
All right. Thank you. Great show as always. And welcome to Hannity. All right. Tonight, the chaos continues in South Florida. The Broward County Supervisor of Elections may soon be out or worse. Tonight, a criminal investigation is now